Mia Thompson held her left hand away from her skirts so the fresh ink would not transfer to satin, and watched Mayfair slide backward through the carriage glass until polished doors and black railings gave way to narrow streets where no one knew her name. The parish register lay closed now, her signature fixed in a line beneath Jonah veils, and the air inside the hired carriage smelled of damp wool, lamp oil, and the lavender sachet her maid had tucked into the valise without asking permission. One bag, one husband, one road she could not retrace. On the opposite bench, her wedding sleeve shone with a bright, expensive sheen that looked less like celebration than evidence taken from another woman's life. She had told no one except the curate, the registrar, and the man she had just married. Even then, she had told them only what necessity required. Emergency license, legal age, no paternal consent available. She had spoken each answer in a voice that did not waver, while the registrar's pen scratched over paper and the church clock marked each quarter hour with disinterested precision. She had not expected fear to feel so practical. It was a list in her mind. Ring secured, papers folded, coin purse counted, route memorized, no return call at Thompson House. The shock came later, once the wheels struck the ruts beyond the square and she understood there would be no footman to open her next door. No mother to issue instructions, no polished silver tray to absorb the tremor in her hand. What Lady Beatrice Thompson did not know, what no one in her drawing rooms had considered worth imagining, was that Mia had accepted social ruin to escape social respectability. She had not run toward romance. She had run from arithmetic performed on her person. In the blue drawing room at Thompson House, with its pale silk walls and two portraits of men who had built shipping fortunes by never waiting for consent, a contract had been waiting beneath a paperweight of carved lapis. Lord Hargrove, widower, 68, titled Solvent in Title and Drowning in Private Debt. Mia's trust, substantial and carefully settled by a father who had trusted the wrong executor, would pass into marital management upon signature. Her mother's phrase had been stability. The solicitor's phrase had been consolidation. The sum of both had been dispossession in formal language. By the second day after the contract was drafted, Lady Beatrice had ceased raising her voice altogether. She did not need volume. She employed certainty. She sat upright at breakfast, pearls aligned at her throat like punctuation, and said, "The bans will be waived. Lord Hargrove has provided adequate assurances." Mia had folded her napkin once, precise along the stitched edge, and answered, "Adequate for whom?" Beatrice did not look at her immediately. She lifted her coffee cup, examined the porcelain as if the glaze held a schedule, and only then replied, "For this family." The words carried no heat. That was the cruelty of it. Anger might have admitted the possibility of persuasion. Boredom admitted none. Her life in that house had always been arranged into useful displays. She poured tea for women who appraised her as if estimating drapery. She played hostess to men who addressed questions about shipping tariffs to her mother, while Mia's own figures, drafted in a private notebook, remained hidden in the false bottom of her escritoire. She knew freight routes, rainfall patterns at Liverpool, insurance spreads after poor harvests, and which captains drank before noon. She was permitted to know all of it, because she was never permitted to act on it. When visitors praised her composure, Beatrice accepted with a small nod and said, "Mia is very steady." Steady meant silent. Steady meant not troublesome. Steady meant she could be moved from one ledger column to another without complaint. On the afternoon, the solicitor returned with revised clauses. Mia carried the tea tray into the blue drawing room and paused just beyond the threshold when she heard her mother speak, before she announced herself. "A daughter is a negotiable instrument," Lady Beatrice said, the way one might remark that rain benefited spring wheat. "Sentiment is not an asset class." The solicitor gave a nervous laugh, quickly suppressed. Mia set the tray down on the side table without sound and entered as if she had heard nothing. She poured. She offered sugar. She stood beside the mantel while two people discussed the transfer of her future with the detached care of men discussing warehouse leases. When the solicitor asked, "And Miss Thompson's assent?" Beatrice answered for her. She has never mistaken preference for duty. That evening, Mia opened her father's old dispatch box with a hairpin and found the trust schedule copied in his hand, every protective clause he had believed would shield her from exactly this outcome. His script had faded at the edges where damp had reached the paper years ago, but the numbers were legible. So were the signatures that had been added after his death, amendments approved under emergency authority during a fever season when half the household had been ill, and no one had read beyond the first paragraph. She sat on the floor beside her bed, skirts spread in a pale circle, and placed the pages in order until the pattern became undeniable. Her marriage had not been proposed in response to affection, companionship, or even scandal. It had been timed to a debt call. Lord Hargrove's creditors had fixed a date. Her mother had fixed one sooner. Mia did not cry. Her throat ached from holding still, and something harder than tears formed inside her, thin and clear as drawn wire. At midnight she packed one valise, 2-day dresses, one wool cloak, account notebook, father's dispatch box key, gloves, and the small flask she used on long drives. She left behind jewels selected by her mother and letters tied in ribbon from women who called her dear and never asked what she wanted. At dawn she went to breakfast as usual. Beatrice glanced at her plate and said, "You will call on Lady Fenwick at noon. She will begin preparing your presentation as Lady Hargrove." Mia buttered her toast, set the knife down and answered, "I have another appointment." Her mother's eyes lifted then, grey and polished, the colour of winter sea under cloud. "You have no appointments I did not make." Mia met her gaze and said, "Not today." The lane to St. James's had smelled of wet stone and horse sweat, and the church steps had been crowded with coaches unloading rank, lace, and impatience. She had not gone there to pray. She had gone because the registrar kept office hours behind the vestry, and because emergency licenses could be granted to women who arrived with documents and sufficient fees. She had both. What she lacked at first was a lawful witness. She had stood in the small antechamber with her papers in hand, while the clerk shook his head and tapped the rulebook. No witness, no issuance. Around her, bells rang for another wedding upstairs, one with lilies and violin and proper approvals. Mia had felt the minute hand move toward noon and understood exactly how long it would take for Thompson House to discover her absence. Now, in the carriage jolting toward the lane behind Hawthorne Court, she pressed her thumb against the ring the registrar had handed her from a velvet dish and tried to map the shape of the decision she had made. Jonah Vale had stood beside her at the desk in a coat brushed thin at the cuff, shoulders squared, voice low and measured as he gave his name. He had signed with a hand too practiced for a man who claimed no education. He had asked for nothing in return except legal parity in the contract clauses she had insisted upon. Separate property, no claim on inherited capital, dissolution by petition after 1 year if either party requested it. The registrar had raised his brows at that. Jonah had not. "Write them as stated," he had said. The pen paused, then obeyed. The carriage turned off the main road. Cobblestones gave way to packed earth, and the city's polished facades thinned into service buildings, tack rooms, and rows of narrow windows lit by ordinary lamps. Hawthorne Court rose ahead, not as a grand house, but as a long working complex of brick and timber, its rear lane lined with carts and stacked hay bales darkened by old rain. The driver reined in by a side gate. Someone opened it from within. Mia gathered her skirt, lifted her valise, and stepped down into a world where no one would call her lady anything unless she earned it by what she did next. Behind her, somewhere beyond the rooftops, the blue drawing room would be receiving the first note of alarm. A maid would enter with untouched luncheon. A footman would be sent to the mews. A carriage would be dispatched to Lady Fenwick's, then to church, then to every place Beatrice believed her daughter might reasonably go. Reason would fail by dusk. Lady Beatrice would discover, far too late, that the daughter she had priced had finally priced the bargain in return. Mia stood in the lane with ink drying on her glove and pine smoke on the air, and for the first time in years, no one told her where to stand. A stable boy in a patched coat paused with the gate still in his hand and stared at her wedding silk as though it were a lantern carried into daylight by mistake. Mia inclined her head to him because she had no title to offer and no script left to perform, then turned when she heard Jonah's step behind her on the packed earth. He took the valise without asking and led her along the rear wall of Hawthorne Court, past tack hooks and saddle soap, and a row of copper pails turned upside down to dry. The smell of hay and horse and coal smoke pressed close. It was honest work rendered in odours, nothing polished, nothing disguised. Their rooms were above the stables, reached by a narrow stair whose banister had been mended twice in 2 different woods. Jonah opened the door and stood aside. Inside, the floorboards were rough, pine scrubbed pale with sand. The hearth was already laid with small coal, and 2 cups waited on a table marked by old knife scratches. 1 bedchamber, 1 sitting room, 1 shelf of books, 1 basin by the window. Order without ornament, poverty without apology. "I had the lock replaced this morning," he said. "The old one stuck." Mia stepped inside and turned once, measuring dimensions the way she once measured cargo rooms from threshold to beam. "Thank you. You may bolt from within." She set her gloves on the table, saw the dark ink still drying along 1 finger, and gave a short, dry breath that almost became a laugh. "A practical honeymoon." His eyes were dark grey, steady and difficult to read. "I do not intend inconvenience where it can be prevented." He spoke as if drafting terms, no flourish, no claim. Yet command sat in the line of his shoulders as naturally as his coat. She had noticed it at the register and noticed it now when 2 stable hands passed the open door and fell quiet without being told. He crossed to the mantel and placed a folded paper near her hand. "A list of local traders who extend fair credit. The baker's prices are marked, so are the laundress days. I have paid rent through quarter day." Mia looked at the list. The handwriting was neat, compact, disciplined, not clerkly, military perhaps. She had seen men write like that in port offices where 1 blot could cost a voyage. "You prepared this before noon," she said. "Yes." "For a woman you had never met." He considered that, then answered, "I had seen you before." The words landed quietly and remained between them like a sealed letter. He did not elaborate, and she did not ask where or when. Instead, she moved to the window, touched the warped frame, and looked down into the yard where a groom was trimming a horse's fetlock with careful hands. In Thompson House she had looked down into a carriage sweep where men in livery moved, as if choreography had replaced thought. Here each motion had purpose and consequence. Jonah laid kindling in the hearth. "You should eat." "I am not hungry." "That is not the same matter." A statement, not a rebuke. Mia turned back and found, with faint surprise, that she did not resent being answered plainly. In the blue drawing room, every instruction had been wrapped in social sugar before it reached the knife. Here there was no sugar and no knife, only facts. By the first evening in the stable rooms, the rhythm of her reduced world had already begun to disclose itself in useful edges. Water before dusk while the pump still ran clear. Coal counted by scuttle. Bread bought near closing when the baker discounted day-old loaves, candles trimmed with a pin to make them last. She had been raised among abundance and trained for display. Now she entered the arithmetic of survival and found it less humiliating than dependence had ever been. She swept the ash from the hearth herself, folded her wedding gown into plain muslin, and placed it beneath the bed like a document, filed and concluded. In that small order, memory arrived in precise cuts. Breakfast at Thompson House with her mother's pearls aligned like legal punctuation. The blue drawing room at 11, when callers performed sympathy and inventory in the same glance. The noon tray, untouched unless Beatrice required an audience for pronouncement. Tuesdays for Lady Fenwick. Thursdays for the solicitor. Sundays for visible piety at St. James's, followed by colder judgments over chocolate. Mia had moved through it all as a courteous mechanism. Pour, smile, listen, acquiesce. She had known which ladies whispered that she was too composed to inspire devotion, and which gentlemen assessed her dowry while praising her good sense. She remembered each face, and did not miss one. She drew out her account notebook and set it on the table beside Jonah's trader list. Old habit. New necessity. Columns steadied her pulse. Rent, food, lamp oil, soap, laundress, contingency. She added figures until the page looked like control. When Jonah returned from the yard with a heel of bread, he glanced once at the open notebook and then at her ink-stained glove. "You keep books. I was not permitted to keep them publicly. Yet you kept them." "Yes." He set the bread between them and offered a small knife. "Good." The single word held more respect than a season of compliments in Mayfair. She cut the loaf and passed him the larger portion without thought. He accepted it without ceremony, as if the exchange were ordinary and could remain so. 3 days earlier, at this same hour, she had still been walking from room to room in Thompson House, with a tea tray balanced on one hand and obedience balanced on the other. The memory rose with such clarity that the pine walls around her thinned, and she was again in the long corridor outside the blue drawing room with polished silver cooling against her palms. Inside, her mother's voice carried through the half-closed door. "Lord Hargrove requires reassurance on timelines," Beatrice said. The solicitor answered. "Miss Thompson may balk at immediate transfer language." A pause. Porcelain touched wood. Then Beatrice, flat as a counting steel. "My daughter does not balk. She complies. If she mistakes herself for principle, correct her." Mia had stood in the corridor for one breath too long. Not from shock. She had already understood her mother's design. From precision. The phrase had reduced her life to one legal correction. She entered, served tea, and watched steam lift from the cups while her future was discussed, as if she were absent. That night, when the house slept and the corridor clocks ticked with relentless civility, she had copied trust clauses by candlelight until wax hardened along her fingers. At dawn, she packed the single valise. By 7, she crossed Berkeley Square in walking dress and plain bonnet. By 8, she reached St. James's, where carriages crowded the steps and satin rustled like dry leaves in a formal wind. The disruption did not announce itself with grandeur. It arrived as a small cruelty everyone else had already accepted. She stood near the church rail waiting for the registrar's clerk to return with the emergency ledger when a stableman in a worn coat moved too close to the entrance, likely seeking work among departing coaches. A footman in Fenwick livery struck him hard in the shoulder with a gloved hand and snapped, "Away from the ladies, you cur!" The man staggered against the stone balustrade. No one intervened. Two women turned their faces aside to avoid inconvenience. A gentleman pretended fascination with his watch chain. The stableman straightened slowly, dust on his sleeve, mouth set against pain and pride in equal measure. Mia stepped down from the second stair before thought could arrange permission. She took the water flask from her reticule and held it out. "Sir, take this." The footman gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Miss, he is filth." Mia did not look at the footman. "And thirsty." The stableman lifted his gaze to hers. His eyes were grey, intelligent. Not the blurred eyes of drink or surrender, but watchful, contained, startlingly alert, beneath a fringe of untrimmed hair. He accepted the flask with care, as if it were not water but trust placed under witness. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and measured, each word cleanly set. She recognized the voice at once, though she could not place it. Something in it carried authority without display, and the dissonance unsettled her. Stable coats did not usually produce that tone. Behind her, the clerk reappeared in the vestry doorway, flustered and apologetic. "Miss Thompson, the registrar will see you now, but there is a difficulty. You have no qualifying witness present." Mia turned back to him. "Can one be obtained?" "From family or household, yes. From strangers, generally not. The license is extraordinary procedure." "I am aware. Then I cannot proceed." The church bells began above them, pealing for another wedding and drowning smaller sounds. Coach wheels, soft gossip, the scrape of boots on stone. Mia felt the hour closing like a gate. Return to Thompson House meant contract by supper. She understood that with numerical clarity. She held out her hand for the flask. The stableman replaced it, his fingers calloused against the metal. For one suspended moment she considered asking him only to witness, nothing more. The law, however, was built by men who mistrusted female urgency. The clerk shifted from foot to foot. "Miss, if there is no guardian—" "There is no guardian," she said. He lowered his voice. "Then you must bring a husband, or I must decline." Mia looked at the stableman, dust at his cuff, bruise already darkening where the footman had struck him. Eyes that missed nothing. "I do not even know your name," she said quietly. "Jonah Vale." "Mr. Vale, would you sign as witness if I paid your fee?" His expression did not change, but attention sharpened in it, like a blade catching light. "I would sign without fee." The clerk made a helpless gesture toward the rulebook. "Witness is insufficient absent lawful relation under emergency petition." Mia's hand tightened around the flask strap. Somewhere across the square, a Thompson carriage might already be turning. She could feel the old machinery seeking her. Jonah Vale watched her once, fully, as if weighing not her clothes or her station, but the line she would or would not cross when no one promised safety. Then he said in that same low, measured voice, "If you require a husband more than a witness, Mrs. Thompson to be, I can stand for both." The bells kept ringing as if no one on the church steps had spoken at all. Mia looked at Jonah Vale and saw no trace of performance in him, no reckless grin, no hunger for advantage. He had offered himself in the same tone with which he might have offered a coat in rain. Practical, immediate, without demand. That steadiness decided her more than urgency did. "You understand what you are saying?" she asked. "I do." "You would be bound?" "Yes." The clerk made a strangled sound. "Miss Thompson, this is highly irregular." Mia turned to him. Irregular is still lawful, Mr. Pritchard. You said so. He spread both hands at chest height, as if surrendering to forces he disliked, but could not defeat. If both parties attest capacity and intent, and if the registrar approves under emergency clause, I can record it. I can record it, but I do not advise it. Noted, Mia said. Jonah stepped back half a pace to allow a dowager and her daughters to pass down the stair. One of the girls stared at Mia's plain bonnet, then at Jonah's worn coat, then away again with the quick, avid look of someone already composing the afternoon's report. Mia felt the social machinery begin to turn and discovered to her own surprise that shame did not rise, only a narrow, clarifying calm. "Come," she said to the clerk, "before my household sends a search party." The vestry corridor smelled of damp stone and candle wax. A junior curate glanced up as they entered and then looked down very quickly at the ledger in his lap. Mr. Pritchard ushered them into the registrar's office, where shelves of bound books climbed to a cracked plaster ceiling and a single coal fire fought a draught that slipped beneath the door. The registrar himself, a spare man with a pink scalp and steel spectacles, listened without interruption as the clerk explained the petition. When he was done, the registrar studied Mia first. "Miss Thompson, have you been coerced?" "No." "Do you understand the legal consequence of immediate marriage to this man?" "Yes." "Do you intend the marriage to be valid in full, not merely strategic in appearance?" Mia held his gaze. "I intend it to be lawful." He shifted his attention to Jonah. "Mr. Vale, have you deceived the petitioner in regard to your name, standing, debt, prior marriage, or criminal conviction?" "No." "Can you support a wife?" A pause, brief but present. "Yes." The registrar's brow moved a fraction. "How?" "I work." "That does not answer the question." "It answers enough for today," Jonah said, still respectful, still flat. Mr. Pritchard inhaled as if to object, but the registrar only tapped the desk with 2 fingers and gave a short nod, perhaps to himself. "Very well, we proceed under emergency petition. Signatures first, then declarations." Mia removed her gloves. Her hands were steady until the pen touched paper, and then a small tremor ran through her ring finger, visible only because the morning light fell directly across the desk. Jonah moved his hand an inch, not touching her, merely blocking the draft from the window so the page stopped lifting at the corner. He did it without looking at her. She signed in one clean line. The declarations were brief. They spoke the required words. The ring came from a plain velvet dish, likely left by some other hurried pair, and fit her well enough when Jonah slid it into place with careful, work-rough fingers. No kiss was requested, no blessing beyond form. No music from the church above reached that room. When it was done, the registrar blotted the page and closed the book. "Mrs. Vale," he said, and the name struck her like cold water, startling and absolute. "Your certificate will be copied within the hour." Mia folded her gloves over the flask strap and answered, "Thank you." Outside, the square had grown louder. Carriages departed in bursts, servants shouted, a groom ran with a dropped veil. Life continued. She stood for one breath under the church portico beside the man she had married, and felt the oddness of standing unsheltered and unafraid at once. "I have rooms," Jonah said, "not fine ones." "I did not ask for fine ones." "No, you did not." A driver for hire had been dozing on his box with reins loose over one knee. Jonah negotiated the fare in 6 words and climbed up beside the man rather than joining Mia inside, leaving her space and witness in equal measure. During the jolting ride, she watched his back through the front glass, broad under the thin cloth of his coat, and thought, he never once asked what I can pay him. He never once asked what I will owe. By the time they reached Hawthorne Court and climbed the narrow stair above the stables, the legal fact of marriage had outpaced every feeling attached to it. She was not frightened of him. She was frightened of uncertainty, of dependence, of the old trap appearing in a new room. Yet as evening settled over the yard and she sat at the small table with his trader list and her account book open side by side, the trap did not appear. He moved through the space with quiet competence, set water to heat, mended a loose hinge with tools drawn from his own pocket, and spoke only when speech served purpose. Near dusk a knock came, quick and uncertain. The patched-coat stable boy from the gate stood in the hall, holding a chipped plate with 2 boiled potatoes and half an onion. "Cook said there was extra, Mr. Vale." "Thank you, Ned." The boy peered around him at Mia and lowered his eyes at once. "Beg pardon, ma'am." Mia rose, took the plate from his hands and said, "You have done your duty perfectly, Ned. Tell Cook I am grateful." His ears went red. He nodded and disappeared down the stair. Jonah watched the door close. Most do not thank him. Most are badly taught. A line at the corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile yet, but the beginning of one, as if some private conclusion had been amended. He took the onion, reached for the knife, and then stopped when he saw her right hand flex. "Ink cramp?" he asked. She looked down. The fingers she had clenched around the pen all morning had stiffened. "A small one." He set the knife down. "Give me your hand." She hesitated. He waited, expression unchanged, palm open over the table as if requesting a document. Mia placed her hand in his. He turned it gently, thumb pressing once into the muscle below her thumb joint, then again, lower at the wrist. Pain flared, then released. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Camp surgeon showed us. Clark sees up in winter." "Us." The word slid past quickly, but she heard it. Not stable yard language. Not quite. When he let go, warmth lingered in her hand and travelled upward in a way she refused to name. He returned to the onion. She returned to her ledger. Neither acknowledged what had passed between them, and yet the room had altered by a degree too small to measure and too real to deny. 4 days after their marriage, Mia walked with Jonah to early service at St. James's, because he said the vicar there kept fair records for labour hires after prayers, and she said she wished to see whether fair records existed anywhere in London. The churchyard was half mud, half gravel, and her plain hem darkened by the time they reached the side entrance. Men from the mews stood in the back pews. Laundresses took the side aisle. 2 ladies from Mayfair entered late and looked through Mia as if she were part of the architecture. During the final hymn, a gentleman in magistrate's black crossed from the north transept and paused at Jonah's shoulder. "Good morning, sir," he murmured, then seemed to notice Mia and corrected himself. "Mr. Vale, my error." Jonah inclined his head once. No harm. The magistrate moved on too quickly. Mia kept her eyes on the hymn sheet until the service ended. Outside, while the bell rope still swung, she said, "You are acquainted with the bench." "I have carried messages." "Messages to magistrates who call you sir?" His profile remained still. "Some men are careless with forms." She accepted the answer because she had not asked for truth, only signal. The signal was clear enough. Things did not align. She did not press further. By the second week of September, she had begun to learn Hawthorne Court by sound. Tack buckles at dawn, coal carts at noon, the late clatter of kitchen pails when weather threatened. Jonah's tread on the stair was distinct from everyone else's, neither hurried nor heavy, each board taking his weight in the same pattern. 3 evenings running, he returned with coal dust on his sleeve and a folded scrap of paper in his coat pocket that he burned unread in the grate. On the 4th evening, she said, You deliver coal to the East Wing Library very often for a man who dislikes books. He looked up from cleaning a bridal clasp. Did I say I disliked books? You said nothing. It was inference. Then revise it. The next morning she carried him a wrapped heel of bread and, without asking leave, followed at a distance across the lower yard to the service corridor beneath the estate library. A footman admitted Jonah with no argument, though the same footman had twice delayed tradesmen carrying produce. Mia waited in the shadow of a stone arch and counted 50 breaths before stepping to the half-open service door. From that angle she saw only part of the library: ladder rails, mahogany shelves, a globe taller than a child, and Jonah standing near a side table where coal scuttles ought to have been set. Instead, he held a leather volume open in one hand, thumb marking the margin while he scanned a page dense with Latin citations. His mouth moved once as if testing the phrasing. Then he shut the book, replaced it exactly, and lifted the scuttle to his shoulder as a maid entered with kindling. By the time he emerged into the corridor, his expression had returned to its usual reserve. She offered the bread as though she had only just arrived. "For your labour." He took it. "Thank you." "Useful coal route?" "The warmest room in the house," he said, and if there was humour in it, it was bone dry. That Saturday at market, Mia discovered how quickly command could travel without titles. The butcher on Green Lane weighed her parcel, named a price above the posted mark, and smiled at her wedding ring, as if overcharge were tribute due from women who counted too carefully. She placed the coins back in her purse. "You have shifted the scale." He spread both hands. "Madam insults me." Mia turned to Jonah, who had been 2 stalls away examining potatoes with uncharacteristic attention. He met her eyes, then looked at the butcher once. Nothing theatrical, no raised voice, no threat. Just one level glance held long enough to make the butcher clear his throat, reset the weight stone, and announce a lower sum that matched the board. "An arithmetic miracle," Mia said. The butcher muttered, "Apologies, ma'am." She paid exact coin and moved on. At the end of the lane near the cart ruts where pensioned men gathered to trade old campaign stories for beer money, 2 grey-whiskered officers straightened when Jonah passed. One touched 2 fingers to his cap brim. "Captain," the man said softly. Jonah did not break stride. "Not now, Hales." The officer's hand dropped. "As you wish, sir." Mia felt the word strike harder than the magistrate's had. "Captain, sir, not now." She kept walking beside him through the crush of baskets and geese and shouting children, the market noise closing over the exchange as if it had never occurred. At their door above the stables she set the parcels down and untied her bonnet with fingers that had gone unexpectedly cold. Jonah waited while she hung the ribbons on their peg, then handed her the small paper twist of clothes she had not seen him buy. "You are out," she said. "Yes. Many men greet you as if you have been elsewhere." His gaze held hers, direct and unreadable. Many men mistake old roads for present ones. It was not an answer. It was also not evasion dressed as charm. Mia nodded once and turned to the table, where the afternoon light lay across her account book in narrow bars. She wrote the butcher's corrected price in the margin and, beneath it, a second note she told herself was practical. "Mr. Jonah Vale has not yet been fully accounted for." She closed the book before he could read it, rose to lay the fire, and felt him near her shoulder as he passed the kindling without speaking. Their hands touched for an instant over the wood. Neither withdrew quickly. Neither commented. Outside, the stable bell rang for evening feed, and inside their 2-room life settled around them with the quiet density of something being built, one unremarked choice at a time. The stable bell rang for evening feed, and inside their two-room life settled around them with the quiet density of something being built one unremarked choice at a time. Mia set the last split of kindling by the hearth and reached for the kettle, but another sound rose beneath the yard noise. Boots on the stair, hurried and uneven, followed by a knock that struck twice and then stopped as if the hand at the door had remembered rank too late. Jonah crossed the room first and opened it to find Mrs. Pell, the steward's wife from the lower cottages, her shawl pulled tight despite the heat of labour in her face. She looked from Jonah to Mia and seemed uncertain whom she was allowed to address. "Mr. Vale," she said, breath short, "I beg pardon for the hour. Mr. Pell asked if you might come down to the tally room. There has been a correction to wages, and the men are gathering. Thomas is no better, and we have not yet paid Dr. Keene. I did not know where else to go." Jonah took his coat from the peg. "I am coming." Mia was already reaching for her own cloak. "I will come as well." Mrs. Pell blinked. "Ma'am, it is account business." Mia met her eyes. "Then it is precisely my business." The tally room at Hawthorne Court was a long, narrow chamber behind the feed store, with slate boards on one wall and wage ledgers on the other, all of it lit by two smoking lamps that left the corners in shadow. 6 men stood near the table, caps in hand, speaking in low, clipped turns. Mr. Pell had spread a packet of notices beneath a pewter paperweight. He looked up as they entered, nodded to Jonah, then to Mia with the careful politeness of a man trying not to offend the household order by noticing a bride who had fallen out of her class. "They have reduced the transport allotment and cut cottage stipends by a quarter," he said. "Effective this pay period. Signed at Thompson House." The room shifted around Mia by a degree she felt first in her pulse and then in her fingertips. She stepped to the table and lifted the top notice. Her mother's signature, narrow and exact, sat at the bottom beside a solicitor's countersign. The language was administrative, bloodless, temporary corrective adjustment in response to household instability and reputational risk. "Household instability," one of the Carters repeated, not loudly, with a dry edge that passed for laughter among tired men. Mr. Pell cleared his throat. "3 families are already in arrears at the mill. My boy's medicine was due yesterday." Mia read the page again because reading it once left too much room for disbelief. The arithmetic was clear. Her departure had been converted into policy. Punishment had been rendered as management. Jonah stood at her shoulder without touching her. "Can this be appealed through local trustees?" he asked Mr. Pell. "Not before quarter day. We can petition, but petition does not buy quinine." Mia set the notice down very carefully so the edges aligned with the ledger beneath it. She could feel every face in the room waiting for the shape of her response. Not because they expected rescue, but because they had learned that the first word spoken in scarcity often became law. "How much to restore full wages for this period?" she asked. "And clear immediate medicine debts?" Mr. Pell gave her a long look, as if testing whether she was asking from sympathy or competence. Then he reached for his pencil. "With the Pell account and Keene's invoices, £34.12. If we include flour credit for the Brant girls, 38. Mia did not hesitate. "Write every family name. I will settle it tonight." Silence answered her. One of the men shifted, embarrassed for her, and said, "Mum, that is too much." "Too much for what?" Mia asked. He looked down. "For one insult." "This is not insult. This is hunger in legal dress." Jonah's gaze moved to her profile. She did not look at him. She took the pencil from Mr. Pell and copied names into her small account notebook, each line firm, each sum precise. When she finished, she closed the book and said, "No one is to borrow against winter coal. Not yet." Mr. Pell seemed about to protest again, then only nodded. "As you wish, Mrs. Vale." Back upstairs, she locked the door, knelt by the bed, and drew out the dispatch box keys she wore on a cord beneath her collar. The box held her father's trust copies, 2 letters in his hand, and 1 velvet purse no larger than a child's fist. Inside lay the pearl strand that had belonged to her grandmother, not grand enough for court presentation, too old-fashioned for her mother's taste, and therefore spared from Beatrice's inventories. Mia had kept it because her father once called it honest jewellery. It looked beautiful in any light and purchased no one's obedience. She held it in her palm for a moment, cool and weightless as rain before a storm, then wrapped it in linen and rose. Jonah was by the hearth mending a strap. "Where are you going?" "To town." "At this hour?" "Shops that buy quickly stay open late." His hands stilled on the leather. "Mia." She fastened her cloak. "I am not asking leave." Something unspoken crossed his face. Not anger, not surprise. Recognition perhaps of a line he had always known she would walk without witness, if the cost was hers to bear. He stood. "Then I am walking with you. You are needed here. I can return." She opened the door. "If you come, they will pay less. Men bargain differently in front of husbands." His mouth shifted once at that, the nearest thing to concession. "Take the east lane. The paving near Broad Street is broken." She went down the stair alone. The jeweller on Broad Street had closed his front room for the evening, but a lamp burned in the side office where quick transactions were done for clients who preferred not to be seen. Mia gave her name as Mrs. Vale and watched the clerk's eyes flick to her sleeve hem, to her gloves, to the wrapped parcel. He fetched Mr. Larkin, a narrow-shouldered man with magnifiers perched on his nose and the cautious manner of one who made a living pricing desperation. He untied the linen, lifted the strand and let it slide once through his fingers. "Good luster, old drilling, family piece?" "Yes." "Sentimental value increases after sale. I advise realism beforehand." "I advise speed." His glance sharpened. 26. 42. Madam overestimates. Madam can count. He examined the clasp, tested 1 pearl against his tooth, then sighed in theatrical defeat that did not conceal his interest. 34 and 10. 39. Paid in notes and coin now. 36. Final. Mia reached for the linen. Then no transaction. He held the strand back from her hand. 38. Plus receipt. Full description. He looked offended by paperwork, which told her she had landed on the right point. Very well. When he turned to the cash drawer, she let her gaze wander once to the street through the wavering glass. Across from the shop, under the apothecary lamp, a man stood in shadow near the rain barrel, coat collar lifted. She saw only the line of his shoulders and the stillness that made the rest of the lane seem hurried by contrast. Jonah. He had come after all and remained outside, as if honouring her terms while refusing to leave her unguarded. Mr. Larkin returned with notes, coin, and a receipt she read twice before folding into her notebook. She left the shop with her hand closed over the money and crossed directly into the apothecary, where Dr. Keene's assistant was stacking labelled jars into locked cabinets. "I am here for the Pell account," she said, placing the notes on the counter. "And for quinine, willow bark, and the fever powder for Thomas Pell." The assistant frowned at the ledger. "There are also charges for broth and clean linens." "Add them." When she stepped back into the lane, Jonah was no longer under the lamp. For one instant she thought she had imagined him. Then she saw him at the corner by the cooper's yard, speaking quietly to an errand boy and pressing coin into the child's hand for a late cart. He looked up as she approached, and the expression on his face was unlike any she had yet seen there. Not soft, Not severe, settled, as if an internal verdict had just been reached and sealed. "You obtained what was needed," he said. "Yes." "Did he bargain hard?" "He attempted to." "And lost?" "He survived." A brief breath left him, almost a laugh. He took the medicine parcel, not the purse. "Mrs. Pell will need instructions. Keen rights in a hand no one should trust." Back at Hawthorne Court, Mia handed Mr. Pell the cleared receipts, then wrote each restored wage in his ledger herself, so no later correction could erase the figures. Mrs. Pell took the medicine with both hands and whispered gratitude that sounded more like relief than praise. Mia touched her shoulder once and said, "No one owes me thanks for preventing harm my family caused." She did not know Jonah was watching from the doorway of the tally room until she looked up and found him there, one hand braced against the frame, his gaze fixed on her with a concentration that felt almost private. He spoke only when the others had gone. "You sold your last heirloom," he said. "Yes." "For men who may never be told why their wages were restored. Then they may sleep without explanation." He was quiet for a long moment. "You did not consult me." "You would have helped." "I would have." "I did not wish help. I wished speed." He nodded once. "Understood." The next morning opened before light with grain counts and closed after dark with ledger corrections, and the day after that followed the same shape. Cask tallies, flour allotments, bench inventories, names checked and rechecked against payment lines, so no quiet subtraction could be slipped in under festival noise. Mia spent hours in the service office beside Mr. Pell, balancing figures while kitchen girls ran in with revised headcounts and boys from the yard shouted for extra lamp oil. By evening, corrected lists had to be carried to the long dining hall, then carried back again when the cooks changed portion measures after seeing the turnip carts arrive half full. Work moved forward in short, practical exchanges, each one small enough to seem ordinary, all of it adding toward a single crowded meal no one could afford to mismanage. When the harvest supper finally filled Hawthorne Court, tenants, labourers, clerks, and those ladies of nearby houses who believed charity tasted better when witnessed packed the long room shoulder to shoulder. The hall smelled of roast onions, damp wool, bread crust, and the sharp sweetness of cider. Lantern light gilded rough timber and made everyone's best coat look nearly fine. Jonah moved through the crowd in his plain, dark coat, speaking little, seeing everything. Men made space when he approached. Women stopped him with practical questions and received practical answers. Twice, visitors from town addressed him with a formality that sat oddly in such a room. Twice he answered with the same mild reserve, and the matter seemed to vanish. It did not vanish for Mia. After the first toasts, Mr. Pell leaned toward her and murmured, "War Office courier arrived for Mr. Vale half an hour ago. Grey coat, official seal. They are in the study now." The words settled in her stomach like cold metal. She told herself there were dozens of explanations for a grey coat at harvest, none of which required betrayal. She told herself this while gathering 3 ledgers under her arm and crossing the passage toward the old study off the east corridor, where estate papers were signed. The corridor was dim, lit only by spill from the hall and one lamp on a side table. The study door stood half closed. She heard the courier first, voice clipped, bureaucratic. Recovery proceeds more quickly than projected. Lady Beatrice attempted transfer through 2 shell trustees. Then Jonah, lower, unmistakable. "I expected as much." Mia's step slowed. The ledger corners pressed into the soft skin of her palm. The courier said, "There remains concern regarding your method." A pause. Then Jonah answered, each word measured, unhurried, devastating in its clarity. The marriage was necessary. Without it, Beatrice Thompson would have moved the funds beyond recovery. The edges of the ledgers bit harder as her hands tightened by reflex, and a sting rose where paper cut skin at the base of her thumb. Heat followed, immediate and thin, seeping into the glove lining. She did not move. She did not breathe deeply enough to make sound. Inside the study, the courier shifted papers. And Mrs. Vale? She is lawful controlling beneficiary under the original settlement. Her rights are now protected. Protected? The words struck with the force of a door closing. Mia set the ledgers on the corridor table because her fingers had begun to tremble, and she would not walk into that room with shaking hands. She watched one drop of warmth mark the white margin of the top page where the cut had opened. She turned the page over, hiding it, then straightened her shoulders and lifted the stack again. When she entered, both men looked up. The courier in grey had a weathered face and a war office badge sewn discreetly at his cuff. Jonah stood by the hearth with sealed papers in hand, expression composed, unreadable except for one brief flicker in his eyes when he saw the ledgers, and then her face. "Mrs. Vale," the courier said with formal courtesy. "Sir," Mia replied. She crossed to the desk and laid the ledgers down with care, the injured hand beneath the top volume so no stain showed. Her voice, when she spoke to Jonah, was perfectly level. "Mr. Pell requested your signature on the grain disbursement line before the hall closes." Jonah held her gaze. "I will attend presently." She inclined her head once. "As you wish." No accusation, no scene. She left the study and closed the door behind her with steady fingers. In the corridor she stood very still until the pulse in her cut hand slowed. Music from the dining hall swelled and broke against the stone walls in cheerful fragments that no longer seemed connected to her body. She opened her hand and watched the shallow line across her palm brighten, then dull, as she pressed a handkerchief to it. Pain was simple. Pain obeyed pressure. When she returned to the hall, she took her seat beside Mrs. Pell and passed bread baskets, answered questions about flour allotments, and recorded 2 late cider purchases in the margin of her notebook. If anyone noticed she used her left hand for the pen, no one remarked on it. Near midnight, after the last bench had been carried out and the lanterns trimmed low, she climbed the narrow stair above the stables with the ledgers under her arm. Jonah had not yet returned from the east wing. In their room, she washed her hand in the basin until the water ran clear, wrapped the cut in linen, and sat at the table with the account book open and blank. The house around her settled beam by beam into silence. She waited for the tremor to pass. Then she began to write. The first page was a copy of the wage reductions signed at Thompson House. The second was Mr. Pell's corrected ledger line in her own hand, with each restored amount matched to a family name. On the third, she listed the medicine accounts she had cleared at Keen's, attaching the apothecary receipt and Mr. Larkin's purchase slip for the pearl strand, because private sacrifice mattered less than traceable proof. Her wrapped hand left faint pressure marks along the margin where pain made her grip too hard. So she paused, loosened her fingers, and began again in a cleaner script. Around her, the room held its breath in old wood silence, while the stable yard below settled by degrees into dark. By the time the yard clock struck 1, she had built 2 packets, one for the magistrate, one for Lady Beatrice. She opened her father's dispatch box and added trust copies in his faded hand, then the amendment pages that had been inserted after his death, then a neat sheet of her own numbers showing how debt calls aligned with the proposed Hargrove marriage date. Her mind did not race. It narrowed, column against column, signature against signature, motive against consequence. When the key turned in the outer lock at last, she did not start. Jonah stepped in quietly and shut the door behind him. Coal smoke clung to his coat, and there was a tiredness at the edges of his face he had not worn earlier in the evening. His gaze moved from the stacked papers to her bandaged hand, then to the valise she had already drawn from beneath the bed and set open on the chair. "You are leaving tonight," he said, "before dawn." He removed his gloves and laid them on the mantel with deliberate care. "Where?" "To Berkeley Square." He took that in without visible surprise. "To your mother?" "Yes." He crossed to the table, stopping at the opposite side rather than near enough to crowd her. "You heard enough in that study to wound, not enough to judge." Mia folded the top page into the packet and tied the string tight. The marriage was necessary. Without it, Beatrice Thompson would have moved the funds beyond recovery. "Those were your words." "They were." "Then I did hear enough." A quiet passed between them, dense and unsparing. He did not deny the sentence. He did not dress it in gentler language. She had come to rely on that restraint, and tonight it cut cleanly. "At St. James's," she said. "When I asked for a witness, did you already have orders concerning my family?" "Yes." The admission landed like iron set on wood. "And when you offered to stand as husband more than witness?" "Yes." Her throat tightened once, not with tears but with the physical effort of keeping her voice level. "You used lawful procedure to secure access. I used lawful procedure to stop theft that had already begun." She met his gaze and saw no triumph there, no smugness, no appetite for her humiliation. Only a hard steadiness that made argument feel like striking stone. "Did you ever intend to tell me before someone else did?" "Yes." "When?" "When it no longer endangered the recovery." She nodded once because the answer was precise and it was late, and precision was all she had left to trust. "Then we proceed in the same manner. I will go now, where recovery requires." He looked at the open valise. 2 dresses, account book, dispatch box papers wrapped in oilcloth, no wedding silk, no ornaments. One life reduced to what could be carried down a narrow stair. "You should not go alone at that hour," he said. "You once told me I may bolt from within. I have applied the principle more broadly." A faint shift touched his mouth, not humour exactly, but acknowledgement of being answered in his own terms. "Take the side lane past the cooperage. It is watched." "By whom?" "By men who owe me favours." She fastened the valise straps. "Am I to be grateful?" "No," he said. "Only safe." He took one step as if to reach for the bag, then stopped himself. "Mia." She waited. What happened between us in these rooms was real. Her hand tightened around the handle. She had not asked for this sentence, and hearing it now felt almost cruel in its timing. "I have not decided what to do with that information." "I understand." He moved to the door and opened it. He did not ask permission to accompany her. He did not offer apology she had not requested. He simply stood aside and gave her passage. Before dawn, she descended the stair in travel clothes and plain gloves, the wrapped hand hidden beneath wool. The lane smelled of wet brick and fodder. A cartman she recognized from Green Lane lifted 2 fingers at her and said nothing, then shifted his wagon half a yard to clear her path. At the corner near the Cooper's yard, a hired carriage waited with no crest, and a driver who looked straight ahead until she climbed in and named Berkeley Square. London at that hour was all ash colour and chimney haze, servants' doors opening, milk pails clinking, tradesmen's wheels sparking faintly on stone. She sat with the valise at her feet and her documents on her lap, feeling each turn as if she were counting down to impact. Thompson House stood exactly as she had left it. Polished black door, brass bright enough to reflect a narrowed world, curtains drawn back for breakfast light. The footman who answered saw her clothes first, then her face, and went pale in stages. Miss Thompson, do not announce me, she said, and walked past him before the sentence could be corrected. The entrance hall smelled of beeswax and coffee. Somewhere above, a maid hurried across the gallery. Mia crossed the marble, turned into the blue drawing room, and found it empty, the morning fire just laid. Beyond, through the half-open breakfast door, she heard china touch saucer and the rustle of a newspaper being folded exactly once. Lady Beatrice sat at the small round table by the long windows, pearls at her throat, silver coffee service arranged in military symmetry. She did not rise when Mia entered. Her eyes moved from Mia's hem to the valise, to the packet in her hand, and if she felt surprise, she expressed it as irritation at a breach of schedule. "You arrive uninvited," Beatrice said. "Again." Mia set the valise by the door and crossed to the sideboard. She took the silver tray, placed it on the breakfast table between the coffee pot and her mother's right hand, and laid the tied packet at its centre. Then she untied it and spread the pages in order. Wage cut notice, corrected ledger copies, medicine receipts, trust amendments, debt timelines, signatures. "Read them now," she said. Beatrice looked down, then up. "I do not take instructions from my daughter." "From me, no, from the figures you will." Beatrice lifted the first page with 2 fingers, as if avoiding contamination, and scanned the signature block. Her expression did not change. She turned to the next page, then the next. At the medicine receipts, she gave a small sound that might have been contempt. "You sold jewellery to perform charity among servants," she said. "How theatrical." "It was not charity. It was restitution." "Do not moralize at me in my own house." Mia stood straight, hands at her sides, and answered in 4 words. "Then read in silence." The room held. Outside the windows, a gardener dragged a rake through gravel in slow, even pulls. Beatrice reached the trust amendment copies and paused longer, her gaze tightening at one clause she had likely hoped no one would ever read, line by line. She set that page down with care too controlled to be calm. "These are private estate documents," she said. "You had no authority to remove them." "I copied what concerns my legal position." "You have no legal position independent of family direction." The words were so familiar they almost passed through Mia untouched. Almost. She laid one finger on her father's original settlement line, where her name stood clear beneath his. "That statement is no longer operable." Beatrice's eyes sharpened. "Who has been advising you?" Mia did not answer. "Name him." Still Mia did not answer because footsteps sounded in the hall, measured and unhurried, followed by the butler's uncertain voice announcing no one at all, before falling silent. Jonah entered in a dark formal uniform cut to military exactness. Not the worn stable coat, not the labourer's plain cloth. Silver braid marked rank at the cuff. A signet seal hung at his watch chain where she had never seen one. Behind him came a magistrate in black, and the grey-coated War Office courier from Hawthorne Court, carrying a leather case and official folio. The tableau was so orderly it felt rehearsed by law itself. Beatrice rose then, chair legs scraping the rug. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Jonah stopped beside the breakfast table, close enough that Mia could hear the quiet of his breathing, far enough that nothing in his posture presumed her allegiance. He looked first at Beatrice, then at Mia, and spoke in the same low, measured tone she had heard on church steps and in market lanes and midnight rooms above stables. "I am Jonathan Vale, Marquis of Ashbourne, appointed Crown Auditor over estate fraud, and your daughter is the lawful controlling beneficiary you attempted to disinherit." No one moved for a heartbeat. The morning seemed to contract around the sentence. Beatrice's face did not blanch. It hardened. Marquis or stableman, your theatrics do not alter settlement authority. The magistrate stepped forward and opened the folio. They do, Lady Beatrice. Authority is determined by instruments and statute, not preference. We are here to execute provisional freezes and obtain acknowledgement pending full hearing. The courier placed sealed papers on the tray beside Mia's documents, official wax bright against polished silver. Jonah did not look at Mia again immediately. He was watching the process, every detail, as if one missed line could still cost her everything. Mia felt the room reassemble itself around a new axis. The man who had mended her latch and carried coal and stood under apothecary lamps had been standing inside power all along, not borrowing it, not mimicking it. The revelation did not erase the wound. It altered its dimensions. What she had taken for a private betrayal was also a public operation threaded through law, debt, and timing. Her hand, still bandaged beneath the glove, throbbed once in reminder that facts could protect and injure in the same motion. Beatrice looked from uniform to seals to Mia, and for the first time in Mia's life, there was calculation in her mother's gaze, without certainty. Mia, she said, voice flattening to command by habit, you will dismiss these men and come upstairs with me. Mia did not look away from the tray of papers. No. The word was quiet. It stood. No. The word was quiet. It stood. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened around the back of her chair until the knuckles paled, but she did not sit. You do not understand the position in which you place yourself. Mia kept her gaze on the documents spread over the tray, as if they were a chart, and she had already chosen her heading. I understand it precisely. The magistrate drew one paper from the folio and placed it atop Beatrice's pages. Lady Beatrice Thompson, this is a provisional freeze on trust disbursements, estate transfers, and associated accounts pending review. You may contest it at hearing. Today, you will acknowledge receipt. Beatrice gave a short, brittle laugh. On whose complaint? On mine, Mia said. And on mine, Jonathan added. Beatrice turned on him, voice low with contempt, sharpened into disbelief. You married my daughter under false pretenses. He did not flinch. I married your daughter under lawful license at St. James's, witnessed and entered by Registrar Pritchard. Certified copy is in the file. The courier opened the leather case and produced the certificate. Mia saw again the dark line of ink beneath her own name, the same line that had dried on her glove in a hired carriage. The magistrate compared seal and signature, then nodded once. Beatrice looked at Mia as if trying to recover old leverage by force of habit. Annul it, Mia answered in 4 words. No, Lady Beatrice. Read. For the first time, her mother obeyed. She read through the trust clauses her late husband had drafted, the emergency amendments added in fever season, the debt timelines, the wage cut notices, the restored ledgers, the apothecary account, and the receipt for the pearls sold to cover medicine and arrears. At the receipt, Beatrice's mouth thinned. Sentiment masquerading as governance, she said. Governance, Mia replied, is what prevented children and labourers from paying for your retaliation. The magistrate set down his pen. Lady Beatrice, acknowledgement. She did not move. The butler appeared in the doorway, face arranged into formal blankness that failed to hide alarm. Pardon, my lady. A clerk from Fleet Mercantile Bank is here under warrant. He requests signature confirmation for the freeze. The moment broke the last illusion that this was private family theatre. Beatrice sat, took the offered pen, and signed with hard, controlled strokes that cut into the paper. The magistrate sanded the line, folded one copy into his folio, and handed another to the courier. Further instruction, he said. Mrs. Vale, as controlling beneficiary, may issue interim wage orders pending hearing. Mia took the sheet. Her bandaged hand pulsed once beneath the glove, then steadied. A second servant entered before anyone dismissed the first, carrying a salver stacked with folded notes. From Lady Fenwick, Lady Armitage, and Lord Hargrove's secretary, my lady, marked urgent. Beatrice broke the top seal. Mia watched her mother's expression remain composed, while colour left her face by increments. Withdrawn regret, changed circumstances, existing engagements no longer convenient. Society's language for abandonment arrived in cream envelopes with gilt edges. Jonathan did not look at the notes. He looked at Mia and spoke in a tone meant only for her to hear. Mr. Pell should receive instruction before noon, or the mill will delay again. She inclined her head. Then we go now. Beatrice set the note down with exact care. You walk out of this house with him. You do not return as daughter. Mia lifted the wage order and her father's copied trust pages, slid them into her satchel, and met her mother's gaze without heat. You made that decision years ago. By late afternoon of that same day, the long table in Hawthorne Court Service Hall was covered in ledgers, loose receipts, and 2 fresh inkstands, and every place where Mia had once stood as tolerated helper now waited for her signature. Mr. Pell hovered at the corner with his cap in both hands, while Mrs. Pell and 3 kitchen women stacked wage envelopes in rows. Mia read each line before she signed. Restored transport allotment, full cottage stipends, medicine reimbursement to Keen's apothecary, flour credit confirmed for the Brandt sisters. She attached the Pearl receipt to the reimbursement page and wrote beside it, sold voluntarily for wage and medical restoration. Expense recognized and closed. She added no flourish. Mr. Pell cleared his throat. Mrs. Vale, if I may, I owe you plain speaking. She looked up. When cuts first came down, a messenger from Ashbourne office told me to keep duplicate books hidden and dates exact. Said there might come a morning when precision mattered more than obedience. He glanced once toward Jonathan, who stood by the window in plain coat again, sleeves rolled, reading a grain invoice as if rank were clothing he could remove at will. I did not know the full arrangement, only that you should be trusted if the hour turned. Mia absorbed that quietly. You kept the records. I did. You kept people fed where you could. We tried. She pushed the signed disbursement sheet toward him. Then we continued trying. One by one, tenants entered for envelopes. Men who had once addressed her with polite uncertainty now met her eye, took their wages, and thanked her by name. Women brought corrections without apology and watched her amend the lines in real time. No one performed deference. They performed trust, which was rarer and harder won. Ned, the patched coat stable boy who had held the gate on her first night, came last with a crate tally and stood straight enough to shake. Mrs. Vale, cook, asked if winter onion allotment should be cut if the road turns bad. Mia reviewed the numbers. Not cut. Shift 1 cart from cider to root storage. Write it. Ned blinked. Write it where? She turned the ledger toward him and placed the pencil in his hand. There. He wrote slowly, tongue caught at the corner of his mouth with concentration, and when he finished she signed beneath his line so the order could not be dismissed as a boy's mistake. At dusk, with lamps lit and the last envelope gone, she gathered the remaining papers into 3 bundles. 1 for magistrate filing, 1 for Hawthorne records, 1 for Ashbourne estate office. Nothing remained loose. Nothing waited on memory. When the room emptied, she sat at the head of the table she had once not been permitted to approach without invitation, and flexed her bandaged hand. Jonathan set a small wooden box by her elbow. "You should rest it," he said. "What is in the box?" "Your dispatch box keycord broke this afternoon. I had the clasp repaired." She opened it. The cord lay coiled neatly, fitted with a sturdier silver catch. Beside it sat a second object wrapped in paper. She unfolded it and found the old pearl strand, newly restrung, clasp polished. Her breath caught, then settled. "You bought it back?" "Yes, from Larkin. I recorded it as closed expense." "It remains closed." He met her eyes. "This is not reimbursement. It is return." She touched the pearls once and rewrapped them. "Then they will stay in the dispatch box with the trust copies, as record, not ornament." His mouth shifted, that rare, almost smile that remade the severe lines of his face into something unexpectedly open. "As you decide." Evening drew fully in. Outside, cartwheels faded down the lane, and the yard took on the deep quiet of work, finished honestly. Jonathan remained standing across from her, hands resting on the table's edge, as though rank and history and deception had narrowed to one question he would not force. "There are matters still owed to you," he said. "You asked why magistrates called me sir in church, why retired officers called me captain, why papers burned in the grate, why I was in the library with Latin law volumes, why men watched lanes when you walked alone. The answer is one structure. I was appointed to audit estate fraud tied to military contracts and private debt. Your mother's transfers were part of it. The notes were field reports. The burned pages were cipher copies after extraction. The library volumes were precedent on beneficiary control under contested amendment. Hales served under me. So did men now working bank warrants." Mia listened without interrupting. The explanation did not erase the blade of that sentence outside the study door, but it gave it context, and context altered weight. "You could have told me sooner," she said. "Yes." "Why did you not?" "Because if I misjudged one step, they would have moved your funds before seizure and destroyed the record trail. I chose the operation over your trust." His voice lowered, roughening at the edge for the first time she had heard. "I do not ask you to call that kindness." She rose slowly, palm flat to the table until the stiffness in her hand eased. "It was not kindness." He accepted that with a single nod. "It was protection by concealment," she continued, "and concealment has a cost." "Yes." Silence settled, not hostile, not yet soft. She moved the final bundle of papers toward him. "The 1-year dissolution clause remains in our marriage contract," she said. "I remember every word." "As do I." He reached into his coat and drew out a sealed ring, heavy gold, Ashbourne crest, cut cleanly into the face. He set it beside her hand, not pressing it on her finger, not closing her options with gesture. "This is the estate signet used for wage orders, tenant protections and trust directives," he said. "If you remain at Ashbourne Court, you use it in your own authority. If you prefer separate residence, I execute it that way tonight. If you prefer dissolution when the year concludes, I sign without contest. I will not keep you by strategy again." Mia looked at the ring, then at him. The room smelled of ink, cooling coal and bread crust from supper trays, the same ordinary scents that had framed their first nights above the stables. She remembered his hand shielding her signature from draught, his shoulder under rain by the apothecary lamp, his silence when she said she did not ask leave. His door opened without claim when she left before dawn. Not merely power, restraint within power. She picked up the signet and set it on the wage ledger atop her name. "I am not returning to Berkeley Square." He did not move. "I am not going to the townhouse you could place at my disposal," she said. "I am going where accounts are honest, because we make them honest." A long breath left him, quiet and visible only in the soft release of his shoulders. He asked without title and without haste, "Will you remain because you choose it?" Mia held his gaze and answered, "I already have." The next morning, under clear light at the same long table, she pressed the Ashbourne signet into warm wax beneath a fair wage order written in her own hand, while Jonathan stood beside her reading the tenant list. And when Ned brought the onion cart tally for her approval, she signed first and passed the pen to him.